In this segment, we will work on the back wall, and in the cutting guide under any color medium weight chipboard, for the back wall we have some pieces for the tops and the base, the top and the base, and then some little side pieces. And then if you have black chipboard available, under the black section, under the back wall, you can see there's two pieces for both the fronts and the backs listed. So the first thing we want to do is make a little sizing check here, and I've got the structure, and I'm putting one of my back columns in so that hopefully you can see this, it's right on a line on my craft mat, or you could use a ruler for this. And then I'm bringing the other tower in and putting that on my craft mat as well. And what I want to do is look at this measurement down here and see what it is. Now we know that this should be 7 5/8. This is what we cut up here. Sometimes things don't always stay the same, so I'm just double checking, and on mine it is still 7 5/8. So that's the measurement we want to use to cut one of these pieces of the top and base to length. We cut them 8 inches to begin with, just so we'd have a little play, but now I'm going to cut it to 7 5/8. Now that I have my piece cut to 7 5/8, I want to take my centering ruler and mark a line in the center. Once I've drawn that line, I'm going to position this piece of chipboard on my craft mat so that that line is aligned with one of the lines on the mat. And then I'll just anchor it in place with a couple of pieces of blue tape. Now this is a circle template, and I'm going to use the 1 1/2 inch circle down here, and I think you can see it has some little cross lines in there. And we're going to use the ones here that are on the vertical to line up with that same line on our craft mat that we put the center line from the chipboard on. But when we do that, we want to allow a 1/16 of an inch gap between the top of the chipboard and the edge of the circle on the template. And when you have that, go ahead and draw lightly 2 arcs where the edge of the template is. Now I'm going to use a couple of pieces of my chipboard here, and what I want to do is put one upright and then take another one and butt it up right against that, and then hold that there. And that'll give us a little 1/16 inch channel here, and that will help us line up our small, this is the center wall tower. I'm bringing that in, and I'm going to line up its edge with the opening, the space that I have here, and then center it in between those 2 light lines that I drew. And once I have that in place, I'll put some pressure on it, and then I'm going to draw with darker lines, or you could use a different color, that shape. Then I'm going to write on the left one, left top, and on the right one, right top. And then I'm going to cut out with a fresh craft knife blade on those 2 darker curves that I just made. So I've cut those pieces on the lines, and we don't need this interior piece, so I'm just going to discard that. And then I'll use these as templates and draw them out on my other 8-inch piece. And when I draw them out, I'll make sure I put what side they go with. So this will be the left base, and I'll write inside just so I remember. And I'll trace the right one as well and cut those two pieces out. And now that we have our pieces cut to size, we want to measure the front on both of them. The front is the shorter piece, and my left is 3 1/8, and my right is also 3 1/8. So that's the measurement I will use to cut my fronts to size. In the cutting guide it said to cut them 3 3/8. That just is a little generous so that you can trim them to the size you need. So I'll cut my fronts to 3 1/8, and now I can just put these little pieces aside for a few minutes. I'm going to use a Tim Holtz torn notebook die to add some interest to the top edge of my walls. Now before I do that, I want to add some decorative paper, and on the two fronts I'm going to use this paper from the 6x6 pad. It's kind of black and brown textured, and then the same paper but in red I'm going to use on the top of the back walls. And I've cut these strips 7/8 of an inch wide. So I'll just put them on with some score tape. So I've added my decorative paper to the tops of both walls in the front. And then if you are not using black chipboard, on the back you'll want to put some black cardstock. You won't be able to see it on here, of course. On the front piece, you can use a piece that's 7/8 of an inch wide. But on the back of the back wall piece, you'll need to use a piece that is 1 1/4. So 1 1/4 on the piece of black cardstock that goes on the piece of that's labeled back. Now you don't need to do this if you're using black chipboard, unless you think it's not black enough or something like that. Then you can go ahead and add those pieces. Now, as I said a few minutes ago, I'm going to use this torn notebook on the edge die. If you don't have this die and you have other steel rule dies, you could see if there's something else that you like that would do the same effect. Now, what I want to do is, when I put a chalk line on here, hopefully you can see it. The chalk line is right at the edge of the edge of this cutting of the torn notebook. Now, it's a little distressed looking because that's how Tim Holtz rolls, but we can still use that and line that up. So what I'm going to do is take my piece of covered chipboard, and I want to line it up so that the edge of the chipboard lines up with the top edge of those little cutouts there. And then experiment with it left to right to see, you know, where you want the cutouts to be. And when you get it in a place that you like, go ahead and use some low-tack tape to hold it down. Now, before I put this low-tack tape on, I put it on my blue jeans a couple times just to reduce the tackiness even more, because I don't want to risk pulling up the a layer of the chipboard here. So I'm going to go ahead and run this through my die cut machine. I have a Vagabond, Sizzix, and they all have plenty of room to run this through in this direction. Those are the only machines I'm familiar with. Hopefully whatever machine you have is wide enough Most of them I think have about a 6-inch base. So anyway, that is the, I'll run that through, and then I'll clean the die out and run my other 3 pieces through as well. So here are my chipboard pieces with their tops cut out. I also used my black marker to make sure that any edges of the paper that were white aren't showing. And then of course if you're using craft chipboard instead of black, you'll have to do the edges a little bit more. And then I also did use a little distress ink. It's more noticeable on the red sides here. I also cut a little piece. This is just black cardstock. I cut it 3.5 inches tall, and I put the 7/8 inch band of the red on top of it, and then cut it out with the die as well. We'll use that when we join these 2 pieces to make our 7 and a 5/8 inch piece. We'll figure out where to put that, and we'll use that as a little backing piece there. So next we want to cover our top pieces that we cut before with some pattern paper. I'm going to use this from the 6x6 pad, and I've cut 2 pieces that are 3/4 inch wide by about 3.5, because that's what the length of these are. And this is kind of directional paper, so I'm going to make sure I adhere them in the right orientation. Remember, the ends with the largest opening is towards the front, and I'll put these on with score tape and then cut out around that opening. Now we're ready to start assembling our wall, and the first thing I'm going to do is put the 2 back pieces together into one unit that measures 7 5/8 of an inch long. So I'm going to use my mat for this and flip them so I'm looking at the back, put one in the corner, and I'll just use a little blue tack tape to hold this in place slightly. And then I'll take the other piece, flip it over, and put it on my 7 5/8 inch mark. Make sure it's straight there. And again, hold that lightly with some blue tack. Now this piece, it's going to span this, and we're just looking for a part that will give us at least 1/4 inch overlap on our sides, and then look up here at the top. It's doubtful that the little cutouts will match exactly, so you may just need to trim off ones that won't. I think what I'll do is trim off the ones that are I'll only have one here, it looks like, and then I'll just cut these other ones off. So let me do that. And now I have, you can see it looks kind of continuous here. So I'm just holding it where I can see, and then I'm going to just use a chalk pencil. So I use my chalk pencil on either side of this piece of black cardstock, and that shows me where I can run my score tape to put this piece on. So I'll add some score tape here. So I have my score tape added. I'll remove the backing, and then I'll put my piece in place here. And now that I have this unit put together, I want to mark for our top of the inside wall, these little, where this piece will go, and where to put our ledger strips. So I'm just lining my unit up on my craft mat, and I want to measure up 2 13/16. That's a 1/16 more than 3/4. Now, so I've got 2 inches to this grid line, and then I'm measuring my 13/16 from that grid line to the edge of my ruler. And I'm just going to put a pencil line there. And that'll show me where to put my placement for my top ledger strips. And for our ledger strips, I've cut 6 pieces that are 2.5 inches. I've already installed 2 on the outside here. I've just held them back from the bottom about 1/8 of an inch, and then used a piece of my chipboard to hold them back the 1/16 of an inch from each edge. And then here on the top and bottom, I'll put these in. They butt up right against the chipboard that we installed, the ledger strip we installed on the side. And this bottom one, we hold it back 1/16 of an inch. And the top one, we put directly on that line that we drew. So hold it tight against this ledger strip, and then the top edge should align with that line that we put on. So I'll get those ledger strips installed. Unfortunately, I didn't turn the camera back on when I installed these sides, but what I did was I put the left base inside and the right base inside. I glued them against the ledger strip, making sure I kept this edge even on the outside. Then I took a side piece and glued it to the ledger strip, making sure it was flush with the edge on both sides. And then I took the other side pieces and I just used the ends of these ledger strips as a space placement guide. It's not necessary for them to come right here to the center. And so then I'm letting that glue set up. And then once the glue is set up on the sides and the base, we can go ahead and put the top pieces on. I'll just run a bead of glue along the top of the ledger strip and the top of these side walls. Make sure I've got the right pieces. Put them in flush to the end and resting on that ledger strip and flush with our side pieces. Give that a little pressure and then repeat that on the other side. And then we'll let that dry thoroughly. Once our glue is set up here, we can insert our small wall tower. We're not gluing it in, so the window placement doesn't matter at this point. Make sure it's seated all the way in there and flush with the back. And then let's just take our pieces and our front wall pieces and put them up next to it and see how they are fitting. Now on this side is perfectly flush. And on this side maybe it's just a hair over. So I'm going to trim that side before I finish here with my decorative paper on the front. So I trimmed just a tad off of this left. It was just a sliver really, but I did write the word left on it, and I also wrote it on the back side because here in a minute I'm going to cover up this front with paper. And you can see I've prepped it for paper by putting score tape around up to that edge. I'm just going to butt my decorative paper, and this is the reverse side of the feature paper from this paper collection. But I'm just going to run it and butt it up exactly to that the edge of this top paper that we already put on. So I'll do that for both pieces here. So I've added my decorative paper to the bottom of this section, and then I think you can see over here that I've also added some decorative trim. Now I made this trim with some of the reserved trims from that one 12 by 12 piece, and then I'm going to back it with a little bit of red. This red is from the 6 by 6 pad. It's the reverse side of this paper. It's a nice red. And I've backed both pieces with some score tape. And the only drawback with this trim is that you can't quite fit two, and this side you can't quite fit two of the sayings. So I'm just going to center this on the red, and then you just need to decide if you're going to, since both won't fit, if you'll start with the happily over here on this end, or if you'll end with the after coming in towards the middle there. So get mine cut off, and then I'll be back to install it. So when we install this, we'll take our ruler and line up the 5/8 of an inch mark with the top, so that this edge of the ruler is 5/8 from the top, and then that's where we'll put that top edge of that trim coming across there, and then you can trim it off. Give that a good burnish, of course, on both sides. And then before I glue everything together, I'll do one last dry fit. So I'll put my towers in place, put my fronts in place, slide that in, and hopefully everything should be fitting just nicely. So to glue this up, I'm going to start by putting my left panel on and just running a bead of glue along all of these lines. And once I have my glue on, I'll put my piece on here and make sure I align all of the edges. You want to stand it up as well and make sure everything is working that way. Just put a little pressure on that side for a moment. And then we can go ahead and do the same thing on this side, the right side. And then once the two sides have set up, I'll run a bead of glue kind of in the middle there, and then just kind of open this up a little bit and put some glue on the inside of both of these front edges. I'll also put a little bit down here on the bottom edge. I've got a toothpick at the ready in case something spills out. Now, two things to watch for. Make sure that the bottom edges are even and that your window placement when you put this in is straight on how you want it. So just let this fall apart a little bit, and then there'll be plenty of room to put this in. Push it all the way to the back and down on your work surface, and then put some pressure on it. And I'm going to hold it there with some pressure for a good few minutes. Before we glue things in place, I want to add doors to the towers, and to look like you can walk into the tower from the top of the walkway. So to start with, I've got two of my 1-inch windows here, and I think you can see on this one, hopefully, that I've just cut off the bottom so that it's more like a door than a window. And I'll repeat that on this one on the other side. And then to see the placement, I've just got everything kind of dry fit here together. And I'll take my pencil and mark where the walkway is. the bottom and the sides here, and then I'll be able to center that doorway in that walkway space so that we'll have a nice little door there. Now I have my doors installed, and I'd like to say that don't count on the measurements being exactly the same between towers. They should be very close, but you never know. So I would take my measurements separately. And now we're ready to glue up. And I'm going to start with the tower that's on the left here and make sure I have it positioned the correct way. And I'm going to put glue on these two places here and make sure it's set up and plumb before I move on. Once this left side is set up, I'll put the wall on, and to glue the wall on, I'll put glue on this piece of the wall, and then you can't see it and I don't want to pick it up. I'm going to put glue on this wall right here. And when the wall goes on, this right side should be flush with our notch on that side as well. So as long as you let this tower set up and dry, you should be able to pick this up and put some pressure on it from this direction as well. And then finally we'll put some glue here and in these sides of this notch, and put the last tower in, making sure we get it oriented the correct way. And then let everything thoroughly dry. Next we'll make this tiny little piece of wall that I call the sliver wall, that when the tall tower is put in place here, there's just a 3/8 of an inch piece of wall that goes right in between here, and that's the piece we're going to make now. So you can see there's some very small pieces that go into making this. Up here under the any colored chipboard, we have a top and a base that are these little pieces here, then two side walls, and then under the black chipboard we have two pieces that are these skinny little 3/8 by 3 1/2 inch pieces. Now, even though this is a skinny little wall, I'm still going to treat it like I did the back wall, and I put 7/8 of an inch of the brown and black pattern paper on the front wall, and I have the 7/8 inch of the red checkered paper on the back wall. And I think there'll be just enough space here that we can kind of make a little tower cutout at the end. There's some different sized ones on this die, so I'm going to just pick a couple and just kind of give the illusion of that same kind of look. So I'll go ahead and run these through my die cut machine, and then I'll be back. So here are my two pieces. I die cut the tops and inked them, and then you can see here on the front one that I filled in with some of my checkered paper. And then I'll just put that front one aside for a moment. Then I've got a piece of ledger strip here that's a hair more than 2 inches, and I'm going to bring that up 1/8 an inch from the bottom and just center it there, and that should work just perfectly to put our sides on with, because these are 1/4 inch and our strip is 3/8. So I'm going to build this just with some glue. I'll take a plain piece of chipboard and stand it up here at the bottom, and then run a bead of glue along that edge of that ledger strip. I'll put the other side on. And now I have it to this point, and the other tiny little piece that's going to be the top, I used some of the same paper to cover it that I did for the top of the wall for the back wall, and I'll just run a little glue right along here. And then before I put this little piece on the front, I've got a little scrap left over of my red paper, and I just put a little plain black cardstock on there. It's so tiny that I don't think that it's worth trying to fiddle with the happily ever after paper. So again, we measure for this one by coming down 5/8 of an inch from the top, and then installing our little strip. And now I can go ahead and install this front piece on by just running a bead of glue around the edges here and putting it in place. Now once our little wall is set up, we can go ahead and install it. We're going to put glue on the chipboard piece here, and then also on this side of the sliver wall. So I'll just go ahead and do that. I'm not putting any windows in here. You can't see anything. This is just a very tiny little piece here. And I'm making sure I'm holding it flush right here at the bottom. And then we can install the tall tower. I'm going to run glue down the side of the interior structure and also along the piece of the sliver wall that we just installed here. I'll put the wall in from this direction, and then I'll stand it up to make sure it's all straight and plumb. I'm using a rubber band to help hold this on. You can see it there, but I'm making sure to keep it right at this top edge of the round tower, because there isn't any support, remember, inside of the, except for at the top and the bottom of that tower.